My name is Hattie, and I am 61 years old. I have lived through heartbreak, loss, and more struggles than I can count. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what my daughter-in-law said to me in front of my entire family. She called me a leech, a parasite living off her husband. What she did not know was a secret I had kept for over 30 years. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from today. Drop a like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth. I grew up poor in a small town in rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and money was always tight. My grandmother Pearl raised me after my parents passed when I was just 7 years old. She worked 2 jobs cleaning houses and never complained once. Every night before bed, she would sit beside me and say the same thing. She would tell me that money does not define a person, but how you treat money will show the world exactly who you are. I carried those words with me my entire life. I became a nurse right out of high school, working at the local hospital for 35 years. The pay was never great, but it was steady. I met my husband Marcus when I was 23. He was an electrician, strong hands, gentle heart, and a laugh that could fill an entire room. We got married within a year of meeting and moved into a tiny 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. We never had much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Marcus and I had 1 child, a son named Derek. He was our whole world. We saved every penny we could to give him a good education, a stable home, and opportunities we never had. When Derek graduated from college with an accounting degree, I cried for 3 days straight. Not from sadness, but from pure joy. What nobody knew, not even Marcus for most of our marriage, was that I had been quietly building wealth since I turned 30. It started small. I saved $3,000 from overtime shifts and bought a tiny rental property on the other side of town. The rent covered the mortgage and left a little extra each month, so I saved that too. Then I bought another property, and another. By the time Marcus passed away 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I owned 5 rental properties, a diverse stock portfolio, and savings accounts that had been growing for 3 decades. Marcus knew about some of it before he died, and he was proud of me. But he also understood why I kept it quiet. I did not want money to change how people treated me. When Marcus passed, his life insurance added another significant sum to my assets. I invested wisely, lived frugally, and continued to grow my wealth in silence. Today, my total net worth sits at approximately $10 million. My lawyer, Mr. Patterson, is the only person who knows the full picture. Not even my son Derek has any idea. I live in one of my own rental properties, a modest 3-bedroom house that looks like any other on the block. I drive a 15-year-old sedan that runs just fine. I buy my clothes from discount stores and clip coupons for groceries. To anyone looking at me, I am just a retired nurse living on a small pension and whatever my late husband left behind. That is exactly how I want it. You see, I learned early in life that money brings out the truth in people. When they think you have nothing, they show you who they really are. I wanted to know who truly loved me, for me, not for what I could give them. And then my son married Tiffany. Derek met her 6 years ago at some corporate networking event. She worked at a big bank downtown, wore designer clothes, and spoke like she had practiced every sentence in front of a mirror. She was beautiful, I will give her that. Blonde hair, perfect makeup, the kind of smile that looked expensive. The first time Derek brought her home for dinner, I noticed immediately how her eyes moved around my living room. She was not looking at the family photos or the hand-knit blankets my grandmother made. She was appraising everything, calculating values, judging worth. When she shook my hand, her grip was limp, and her smile did not reach her eyes. I told myself I was being paranoid. Derek loved her, and that should have been enough for me. They got married 4 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than my first house. Tiffany wanted a country club venue, a 5-tier cake, imported flowers from somewhere overseas. Derek asked if I could contribute to the wedding costs, and I gave him $5,000, which was all I should have been able to afford based on the image I had created. Tiffany was visibly disappointed. I saw her whisper something to her mother when she thought I was not looking. Her mother glanced at me with something that looked a lot like pity. From that day forward, Tiffany treated me differently. It started with small comments. She would look at my car and ask if it still ran. She would see my grocery store blouse and ask if I had ever been inside a real department store. She would mention restaurants she and Derek had visited and then add that I probably could not afford the appetizers there. Each comment was wrapped in a smile, delivered with a laugh designed to look like a joke. But I knew better. Derek never seemed to notice, or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. He loved his wife, and I loved my son, so I kept my mouth shut and waited. I was waiting to see who Tiffany really was. It took 4 years, but I finally got my answer. About 6 months before that fateful dinner, things started to shift in Derek and Tiffany's household. Derek called me one evening sounding exhausted and defeated. His company had undergone restructuring, and his salary had been cut by 20%. He was worried about making ends meet but told me not to stress about it. He said they would figure something out. I offered to help with groceries or utilities, the kind of help a retired nurse on a fixed income could reasonably offer. Derek thanked me but said Tiffany would never accept charity. He said it like he was proud of her, but something in his voice told me there was more to the story. Over the next few months, I pieced together what was really happening. Tiffany refused to change her lifestyle despite their reduced income. She still wanted weekly dinners at expensive restaurants. She still bought designer handbags and shoes. She still booked spa appointments and weekend getaways. The credit card debt piled up. Derek mentioned once almost casually that they owed around $50,000. He said it like it was a small problem, but I heard the fear underneath. And then Tiffany started looking at me differently, not with the usual condescension, but with something sharper, something calculating. She began making comments about my house, how big it was for one person, how much space I was wasting. She mentioned retirement communities several times, always framing it as concern for my well-being. She would say things like how it must be lonely living alone in such a big house. She would suggest that there were wonderful places where I could make friends my own age. She would mention that some of those places were really affordable and that I should look into them. I understood exactly what she was suggesting. If I sold my house and moved into a nursing home, the money from the sale could solve their debt problems. She never said it directly, but the implication hung in the air every time she brought it up. Derek never participated in these conversations, but he never stopped them either. His silence felt like agreement. I began to feel like a burden in my own family. The monthly dinners I hosted became uncomfortable. Tiffany would arrive late without apology, spend the entire meal on her phone, and leave as early as possible. When I made my grandmother's famous pot roast, Tiffany would pick at it and mention that she had just been to a steakhouse that served real quality meat. My sister Dorothy noticed the change during one of these dinners. She pulled me aside in the kitchen and asked what was going on with Tiffany. I told her everything was fine, but Dorothy knew me too well to believe that. She told me I deserved better. I told her I was waiting for what she asked, waiting for the truth to come out, I said. I did not have to wait much longer. The dinner that changed everything was supposed to be a normal Sunday gathering. I had invited Derek and Tiffany, my sister Dorothy, and my niece Emma. It was nothing special, just family getting together like we did every few weeks. I spent the entire morning cooking. I made roasted chicken with herbs from my garden, mashed potatoes with real butter green beans from the farmer's market, and homemade apple pie for dessert. I set the table with my mother's china, the nice set I only used for family occasions. Dorothy and Emma arrived right on time, bringing flowers and a bottle of wine. We chatted in the kitchen while I finished preparing the meal, laughing about old memories and catching up on their lives. Derek and Tiffany were supposed to arrive at 5 o'clock. By 5:45, they still were not there. Derek finally texted to say Tiffany had an unexpected work call and they would be there soon. They walked in at 6:15. Derek looked apologetic, but Tiffany did not even bother with an excuse. She just walked past me, kissed the air near my cheek, and asked what was taking so long with dinner. I took a deep breath and told everyone to sit down. The meal started quietly. Dorothy tried to keep the conversation going, asking about jobs and hobbies and weekend plans. Emma, sweet Emma, who always treated me with such respect, complimented my cooking and asked for my chicken recipe. Tiffany sat at the end of the table, scrolling through her phone, barely touching her food. Derek watched her nervously occasionally, trying to engage her in conversation. She responded with one-word answers and theatrical sighs. I noticed she had already finished 2 glasses of wine before the main course was served. Looking back, I should have seen the storm coming. The alcohol, the financial stress, the resentment that had been building for months. All of it was sitting at my dinner table waiting to explode. I just did not expect it to happen over dessert. I had just placed the apple pie on the table when Dorothy asked me about my summer plans. I mentioned casually that I was thinking about visiting my cousin in Florida, maybe spending a week or two enjoying the beach. Tiffany looked up from her phone for the first time all evening. She asked where I was getting the money for a vacation like that. She wanted to know if nurse pensions really paid that well these days. The table went quiet. I kept my voice steady and told her I had some savings set aside. I said it was enough for a short trip. Tiffany laughed. Not a friendly laugh, but something cold and sharp. She said savings from what exactly? She pointed out that I drove a car that should have been scrapped years ago and wore clothes from bargain bins. Dorothy's face tightened. She told Tiffany that was enough. But Tiffany was not finished. The wine had loosened her tongue, and months of resentment came pouring out. She set her wineglass down hard on the table and announced that she had to say something. She said they, meaning she and Derek, were struggling financially. She said they had real bills and real responsibilities. And here I was. She continued sitting in this house that was way too big for one person, contributing nothing, just taking up space. Derek tried to interrupt. He said her name quietly, a warning. She ignored him completely. She stood up from her chair, her face flushed from alcohol and anger. She looked directly at me and said the words I will never forget. "Get a job and stop being a leech." The words hung in the air like poison. Dorothy stood up immediately, her chair scraping against the floor. Emma grabbed my hand under the table. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But I did not move. I did not cry. I did not yell. I started to laugh. It began as a small chuckle, then grew into something fuller, deeper. I laughed until tears formed in the corners of my eyes. Tiffany stared at me like I had lost my mind. She demanded to know what was so funny. She asked if I thought this was some kind of joke. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. When I spoke, my voice was calm and steady. I told her that what was funny was that she had just called me a leech in my own house, and I wanted to make sure she understood exactly whose house this was. Tiffany rolled her eyes. She said she knew it was my house that was the whole point. She said I was sitting on real estate that could actually be useful, instead of hoarding it like some kind of dragon. I nodded slowly. Then I told her this house was actually one of 5 properties I owned. I mentioned that I also had a rather substantial stock portfolio, some bonds, and several savings accounts. The room went absolutely silent. I looked directly into Tiffany's eyes and delivered the final blow. I told her that altogether my net worth was approximately $10 million. Tiffany's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds flat. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish gasping for air. Derek's voice was barely a whisper when he asked if I was serious. I turned to my son with a gentle smile. I told him I was completely serious. I explained that I had been investing quietly for over 30 years. I said his father knew about most of it before he passed. I told Derek I kept it private because I wanted to see how people would treat me when they thought I had nothing. I turned back to Tiffany, who was now gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I stood up from my chair, smoothed down my bargain store blouse, and looked at the woman who had just called me a parasite. I told her that I was not a leech. I was actually the person who owned the roof over her head every time she came to dinner. I was the person she had been insulting for 4 years because she thought I was beneath her. Tiffany started to stammer. She tried to say my name to form some kind of response, but I held up my hand. I was not finished. I told her that calling someone a leech is a very specific insult. It means they take without giving, that they drain resources from others. I asked her to look around the room and tell me who the real leech was. Tiffany's eyes darted to Derek, looking for support for rescue. He stared at the table, unable to meet her gaze. I walked closer to her, my voice dropping low, but carrying clearly in the silent room. I told her she had 1 week to find somewhere else to live. I said my son was always welcome in my home, but she was not. I made it clear that this was not a discussion or a negotiation. This was a consequence. The word hung in the air between us. Tiffany finally found her voice. She called me a liar. She said there was no way I had that kind of money. She insisted I was just trying to humiliate her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app, the one that showed the consolidated view of all my accounts, and handed it to her. I watched her face as she scrolled through the numbers. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked a lot like horror. She handed the phone back without a word. Dorothy broke the silence by saying she had known about my finances for years. She said I had asked her to keep it confidential, but she was not going to stand here and watch her sister be called a liar. Emma squeezed my hand again. She said she was proud of me. Derek finally looked up. His eyes were wet. He said he did not know. He kept repeating that he had no idea. I walked over to my son and put my hand on his shoulder. I told him I knew he did not know. I said that was the point. I explained that I needed to see who people really were before they knew what I had. I looked back at Tiffany one more time. Now I knew exactly who she was. The immediate aftermath of that dinner was chaos wrapped in silence. Tiffany stood frozen by the table for what felt like an eternity. Then she grabbed her purse and practically ran for the front door. Derek hesitated, looking between his wife and his mother, torn in a way I had never seen before. "Go," I told him. "We will talk tomorrow." He nodded once and followed Tiffany out into the night. When the door closed behind them, the house felt strangely quiet. Dorothy poured herself another glass of wine and shook her head slowly. She said she could not believe what had just happened. She said Tiffany deserved every bit of what she got. Emma started clearing the dishes, her way of processing stress. She said she had always known something was off about Tiffany. She said it was the way Tiffany looked at people, like she was constantly measuring their value. I sat back down at the table and stared at my grandmother's china, the plates that had seen so many family dinners, so many celebrations and conflicts. For 4 years, I had absorbed Tiffany's comments and condescension. For 4 years, I had watched her chip away at my dignity with a smile on her face. For 4 years, I had kept my secret, waiting to see if she would ever treat me with basic human respect. She never did, and now she knew the truth, not just about my money, but about her own character. That night, after Dorothy and Emma left, I sat alone in my living room with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. The house was quiet in that particular way that only happens late at night, when even the creaks and settles of an old building seem to hold their breath. I cried for the first time in months. Not because I regretted what I had done, but because I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of 4 years of mistreatment. I had been called cheap, outdated, burdensome, and now a leech. I had been looked down upon by someone who did not know the first thing about sacrifice or hard work or quiet strength. The tears were not from sadness. They were from release. I went to bed that night feeling something I had not felt in a very long time. Free. The next morning, Derek called and asked if we could meet. He suggested a coffee shop downtown, somewhere neutral. I agreed. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he had not slept at all. I sat down across from him and waited for him to speak. He started by apologizing. He said he had no idea Tiffany had been treating me that way. He said he should have paid more attention, should have stood up for me. I asked him if he really had not noticed. I asked about all the comments about my car, my clothes, my house. I asked about the suggestions that I move to a nursing home. Derek closed his eyes like the words physically hurt him. He admitted he had noticed some of it. He said he told himself Tiffany was just being Tiffany. He said he thought she did not mean any real harm. I reached across the table and took my son's hand. I told him that I did not blame him. I said he loved his wife, and love can make us blind to things we do not want to see. But I needed him to understand something. I explained that I kept my finances secret for a reason. I said I wanted to know who would love me for me, not for what I could give them. I told him I had my answer now. Derek asked about him. He wanted to know if he had failed my test. I squeezed his hand. I told him he had not failed. I said he had married someone who did not respect his mother, but that was a different kind of mistake. I told him the question now was what he was going to do about it. He did not answer. But I saw something shift in his eyes, a clarity that had not been there before. We finished our coffee and said goodbye with a long hug in the parking lot. I did not know what Derek would decide about his marriage. That was his choice to make. But I knew our relationship had changed, in that coffee shop become more honest than it had been in years. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. In the days following the dinner, Tiffany launched a full campaign to repair the damage. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages. Long paragraphs appeared claiming she had not meant what she said, that she had been stressed and had too much wine, that she respected me deeply and had always valued our relationship. I did not respond to any of them. Then came the voicemails. Tearful apologies punctuated by sniffling promises to change pleas for another chance. Tiffany's voice swung between remorse and frustration, sometimes within the same message. I did not call back. Finally, she showed up at my door. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I was in the garden pulling weeds when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked up to see Tiffany getting out of her expensive SUV, her face carefully composed into an expression of humble contrition. She walked toward me slowly like she was approaching a wild animal. She said she needed to talk. She said she could not leave things the way they were. She said she was sorry, truly sorry for everything. I continued pulling weeds. She asked if I was going to say anything. I told her there was nothing to say. I said I had given her my decision at the dinner, and it had not changed. Tiffany's composure cracked slightly. She asked if I was really going to throw away our relationship over one bad night. I stood up and brushed the dirt from my gardening gloves. I told her it was not one bad night. I explained it was 4 years of being treated like I was less than nothing. I said the dinner was just when she finally said out loud what she had been thinking all along. Tiffany tried a different approach. She mentioned that Derek was her husband. She said that if I cut her out, I would be cutting out my own son. I looked at her steadily. I told her Derek was an adult who could make his own choices. I said if he chose to stand by someone who treated his mother like garbage, that would be his decision. But I would not pretend to accept disrespect in my own home just to keep the peace. Tiffany's mask slipped completely. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice turned cold. She said I was a bitter old woman who had been hiding behind a fake persona for decades. She accused me of setting her up, of deliberately making her look bad. I almost laughed again. I told her I did not make her look like anything. I said she showed everyone exactly who she was, all on her own. She stormed back to her car without another word. As she pulled out of the driveway too fast, her tires kicked up gravel against my flower beds. My neighbor Nancy was watching from her porch. She waited until Tiffany's car disappeared around the corner, then walked over to the fence between our yards. She asked what that was all about. I told her it was just taking out the trash. Nancy laughed and said that was the best thing she had heard all week. She invited me over for tea later, and I accepted. That evening, sitting on Nancy's porch with a cup of chamomile and a plate of shortbread cookies, I told her the whole story. About my money, about Tiffany, about the dinner. Nancy listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me about her own daughter-in-law, a woman who had made Nancy's life miserable for years before her son finally divorced her. She said she wished she had been as strong as I was. She said she had let that woman walk all over her because she was afraid of losing her son. I asked what happened. Nancy said she almost lost him anyway. She explained that her silence did not protect the relationship. It just prolonged this pain. I thought about that for a long time after I went home. The following week, Derek called to tell me he had moved out of the apartment he shared with Tiffany. He said he was staying with a friend while he figured things out. I asked how Tiffany had reacted. Derek said she blamed me for everything. He said she accused me of deliberately destroying their marriage. I asked him if he believed that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said no. He said the marriage had been broken for a long time. He explained that the money just made the cracks visible. I told my son he was welcome to stay with me if he needed a place. He thanked me, but said he needed some space to think away from everyone. I understood. Sometimes we need distance to see things clearly. A month passed. The autumn leaves turned orange and gold, then fell to cover the ground in a crackling carpet. Life settled into a new rhythm, quieter than before, but somehow fuller. Derek filed for divorce. He called to tell me the day he submitted the paperwork. His voice was calm, resolved in a way I had not heard from him in years. He told me that during his weeks of reflection, he had started going through their finances more carefully. What he found shocked him. Tiffany had not told him the full extent of their debt. The credit card balances were not $50,000 as he had believed. They were closer to $80,000. She had been hiding statements, opening new cards without his knowledge, maintaining a lifestyle they could not afford on a foundation of lies. Derek said he felt like he had been living with a stranger. He said the woman he married would never have done those things. Then he realized the woman he married never existed. I listened without saying much. This was his journey, his realization. All I could do was be there. He asked if he could come for dinner on Sunday. I said yes without hesitation. That Sunday dinner was different from any we had shared in years. Just the two of us sitting at my grandmother's table eating pot roast and talking honestly for the first time since he was a teenager. He asked me questions about my investments, how I had built my wealth while working a modest nursing salary. I told him about compound interest and patience about buying properties when everyone else was too scared about living below my means, even when I did not have to. He asked why I never told him. I gave him the same answer I had given before. I needed to see who people really were. He asked if he had disappointed me. I thought carefully before answering. I told him he had not disappointed me. I said he had made choices that hurt him, married someone who did not deserve him, ignored warning signs he should have heeded. But those were lessons everyone has to learn in their own way and their own time. I told him I was proud of him for waking up. I said many people never do. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He thanked me for being patient with him. I squeezed back. I told him that was what mothers do. Tiffany did not take the divorce well. When she realized Derek was serious, she unleashed a fury that proved every judgment I had ever made about her character. She went on social media and wrote long posts about how I had sabotaged her marriage. She called me a manipulative old woman who had hidden my wealth specifically to entrap her. She painted herself as the victim of a cruel scheme. Some of her friends rallied to her side, leaving nasty comments and sharing her posts. I did not respond publicly. I did not need to. Dorothy and Emma wanted to defend me online, but I asked them to stop. I told them the truth does not need defenders. I said people who knew me would know the truth, and people who did not know me did not matter. Slowly, the tide began to turn. People who knew Tiffany started coming forward in the comments. Former co-workers mentioned her difficult personality. Old friends shared stories of being cut off when they were no longer useful to her. Someone posted a screenshot of Tiffany bragging about marrying into money before she even knew Derek's family background. The narrative crumbled. Within a week, Tiffany deleted all her posts. Within a month, she had moved out of their apartment and back in with her parents in another state. She sent me one final message before she left. It said that I had ruined her life and that she would never forgive me. I read it once, then deleted it. I had no room in my life for her bitterness. One crisp afternoon in late autumn, I met with Tiffany one last time. Derek had asked me to come to help finalize some matters regarding property they had shared. Tiffany insisted on trying to negotiate some kind of settlement directly with me. We met at a coffee shop neutral ground. Derek sat beside me. Mr. Patterson, my lawyer, sat on my other side. Tiffany arrived looking polished but tired. The past months had aged her. Lines showed around her eyes that had not been there before. She got straight to business. She said she wanted compensation for emotional distress. She claimed my revelation at the dinner had caused her significant psychological harm and damaged her reputation. Mr. Patterson did not even blink. He calmly informed her that telling the truth about one's own financial situation was not grounds for any legal claim. He added that any continued harassment or defamation could result in legal action against her. Tiffany's face hardened. She turned to me and asked if this was really how I wanted things to end. I looked at her for a long moment. I told her I did not want any of this. I explained that I had wanted her to be a good wife to my son and a respectful member of our family. I said she chose differently. She asked what she was supposed to do now. Her voice cracked slightly. I told her I hoped she would learn something from this experience. I said I hoped she would treat the next people in her life better than she treated us. I told her that was genuinely all I wished for her. She stared at me like she could not comprehend kindness. Then she stood up, gathered her things, and walked out of the coffee shop without another word. I never saw her again. After she left, Derek let out a long breath. He said he was sorry I had to go through that. I patted his arm. I told him I had been through worse. We walked out together into the pale autumn sunshine. The air was cool and clean. It felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else. That week I visited Mr. Patterson's office to update my will. I had been thinking about legacy, about what I wanted my money to mean after I was gone. Derek would still inherit, but with some guidelines attached. I wanted him to learn to manage wealth responsibly, not to have it handed to him in one overwhelming sum. I set aside a significant portion for Emma, my niece, who had always treated me with genuine love and respect. And I established a scholarship fund for nursing students from low-income families. Young people like I had been working hard and dreaming of something better. When I signed the final papers, I felt a profound sense of peace. My grandmother Pearl had taught me that money was a tool, not a destination. I was using that tool to build something that would outlast me. Mr. Patterson shook my hand and told me he had been managing estates for 30 years. He said mine was one of the most thoughtfully constructed he had ever seen. I thanked him and went home. That evening I visited Marcus's grave for the first time in months. I sat on the stone bench beside his headstone and talked to him like I always did. I told him what had happened with Tiffany, with Derek, with everything. I asked him if I had done the right thing. I told him I missed having someone to check my decisions with. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and approaching winter. I chose to believe that was his answer. 6 months have passed since that dinner that changed everything. Life now is quieter, simpler, and somehow richer than it has ever been. Derek finalized his divorce 3 months ago. He moved into a small apartment near his office and has been rebuilding his life piece by piece. He comes for dinner every Sunday now, just the two of us, and sometimes Dorothy and Emma join. The conversations are real, unguarded in ways they never were when Tiffany was in the picture. He started dating a woman named Grace, a kindergarten teacher he met at a community volunteer event. She is kind and funny and genuinely good. The first time he brought her to dinner, she complimented my pot roast without any undertone of mockery. She asked me about my gardening, my nursing career, my grandmother's recipes. She never once asked about money. When Derek left that night, I told him she was a keeper. He smiled in a way I had not seen since he was a teenager. I started using some of my money in ways that bring me joy. I took a trip with Dorothy to Florida to visit our cousin. We sat on the beach and laughed until our sides hurt. I joined a yoga class at the community center and made friends with women who only know me as Hattie, the retired nurse who can almost touch her toes. I donated anonymously to the hospital where I worked for 35 years, funding a new break room for the nurses who do the hardest jobs for the least recognition. I hired someone to fix up the rental properties, adding updates that would make life better for my tenants without raising their rent. Money, I discovered, feels different when you use it for good. As for Tiffany, I heard she is still living with her parents. She lost her job at the bank shortly after everything came out, something about social media conduct reflecting poorly on the company. Derek does not talk to her except through lawyers, and that is fine by both of them. I do not hate her. That might seem strange given everything. But carrying hatred is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. My grandmother taught me that too. What happened with Tiffany taught me something important. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. I saw who she was from that first dinner, the way her eyes appraised my furniture, the limp handshake, the smile that never reached her eyes. I chose to wait and see instead of trusting my instincts. I waited for 4 years. In some ways, that was my mistake. I gave her 4 years to hurt my son, to disrespect me, to build a foundation of lies in her marriage. If I had spoken up sooner, things might have been different. But I cannot change the past. I can only learn from it. The other lesson is simpler, but harder to live. You deserve to be treated with respect, not because of your bank account or your car or your clothes, not because of what you can give people or what they think they can take from you, simply because you are a human being with dignity and worth. For 4 years, I allowed Tiffany to chip away at my dignity because I wanted to protect my son's happiness. I told myself I was being patient, being wise, being the bigger person. But really, I was being afraid. Afraid of conflict. Afraid of losing my son. Afraid of being seen as the difficult mother-in-law. I am not afraid anymore. Last month, I hosted another family dinner. Derek and Grace were there, Dorothy and Emma Nancy from next door. The table was full of food and laughter and genuine warmth. No one mentioned Tiffany. There was no need. As I looked around at the faces of people who loved me, who had stood by me, who had never cared whether I had $10 or 10 million, I felt something I had been missing for a long time. Belonging. Not because I had finally revealed my secret, not because money had solved anything, but because I had finally demanded to be treated like I mattered, and the people who truly loved me had been there all along waiting for me to see it. If you are watching this, and you have ever felt underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed by people who should have valued you, I want you to know something. You do not have to wait. You do not have to keep secrets or test people or stay silent while they hurt you. You have the right to set boundaries and demand respect from day one. I waited 30 years to use my voice. You do not have to wait that long. The other night, Derek asked me if I ever regretted keeping my wealth a secret for so long. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told him I regretted the years of disrespect I accepted. I said I did not regret learning who people really were. I explained that knowledge was worth more than any amount of money. He asked what I would do differently if I could go back. I told him I would have confronted Tiffany the first time she insulted me. I said I would have trusted my instincts instead of waiting for proof. I explained that I would have believed I deserved better sooner. He nodded slowly like he understood. Then he hugged me and told me he was glad I was his mother. That right there was worth more than $10 million. I still live in my modest house on the quiet street. I still drive my old car. I still buy my clothes from the same stores I always have. But something is different now. I am no longer hiding. Not from the world, not from my family, not from myself. The secret I kept for 30 years was never really about money. It was about fear. Fear that people would only love me for what I had, not who I was. Now I know the truth. The people who really love me never cared about the money in the first place, and the ones who only wanted my money were never really loving me at all. That is the lesson I want to leave you with tonight. If you have ever been called a leech by someone who did not know your true worth, if you have ever been dismissed by people who thought they were better than you, if you have ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up, I hope my story gives you courage. Your value does not depend on what others think of you. Stand up for yourself, set your boundaries, and never ever let anyone make you feel like you do not deserve a seat at your own table. Thank you for listening to my story. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who did not know the real you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss more stories like this one. Wishing you the strength to know your worth and the courage to demand it from others. Until next time, take care of yourselves.